Welcome to the 6th AUSA Institute of Land Warfare Land Pack Symposium and Exposition. And this is easily the largest one we've ever held, and I can't thank you all enough for being here. This promises to be a terrific conference. Before I introduce General Ham, the host, I have a few comments for you, few housekeeping comments. Your badge is our way of keeping good order for the seminar. Due to heightened security measures, you will not be allowed to enter this room or the exhibit hall unless you've got your badge. If you leave your badge in your room or you otherwise lose it, please visit our registration counter. We'll print you a new one. We have a mobile app for this event, and I urge you all to download it. You can go to the AUSA homepage, www.ausa.org/mobile, or you can search for Association of the United States Army on either the App Store or Google Play. The app for this event provides you with the latest agenda, a map of the exhibit hall, list of exhibitors, speaker biographies, etc., and so forth. It will give you notifications throughout the day on various events that are taking place. So please feel free to download the app. We are live streaming this event, so mind your P's and Q's. You're going out all over the world. We will have a reception in the exhibit hall during the 2-hour lunch break, both today and tomorrow. We hope that you take advantage of this and spend some time with the exhibitors. Self-parking is available for $10 in the Sheraton parking garage only. Please pick up a validated ticket from the parking cashier in the foyer at the top of the escalator. If you're paying cash, you can pay the cashier at that table. If you're paying with a credit card, you have to go down into the parking garage and pay at one of the kiosks. A link to the proceedings from this symposium will be available on the AUSA website within a day or two. That's www.ausa.org. We use question cards here at our symposia. We've left question cards on the aisle seats on both sides. Periodically, I will rise and wander around to pass these out. If you haven't got a card and want to ask a question, or if you filled out the card, I'll bring it up and give it to the speakers, and they will answer those questions or not, as the case may be. We normally have press at our symposia. The ground rules are we are on the record and for attribution. The roster of attendees is on our website at www.ausa.org under the Land Pack tab. They are also available on the app, so it's another good reason to download the app. The web link is printed in the show guide that we provided you at registration. There are several other educational fora that are taking place here. They're in the rooms located to the right as you go out of this room, in the Oahu and Waialua rooms, which are located on this level. I would like to thank all of our exhibitors, without whom this event would not be possible. They're an integral part of the learning experience at this professional development forum. You don't know what you don't know, so I would urge you strongly to go and chat with the members of the American Defense Industry Association and find out what they have to offer the United States Army. We have published the speakers' bios online at our website under the Land Pack tab, as well as being available on the app. The bios are listed in order of appearance. So as is our custom, we won't give lengthy introductions, but we want to know all of our participants and speakers to know that we appreciate their dedicated professionalism and their hard work for the greatest army in the world. Wireless internet is available throughout the second floor meeting space. Log on to Sheraton Meetings, and the password is 2018 Land Pack, all caps. Excuse me. Now, how many of you are members of the Association of the United States Army? Let's see everybody raise their hands. That's not good. There was only about a third of you that are members of this fine association. This is the Army's professional association, and it's vital for our work that we have a substantial and active membership. So I urge you to join the association. We have our membership booth right outside the door, and as I said, we're live streaming this, so we have a picture of all of you that didn't raise your hands. You know who you are. I will ask you now to make sure your cell phones have been silenced. And on behalf of the Hawaiian Tourism Authority, we'll open the session with a Hawaiian blessing. It is my pleasure to introduce Kahu Ramsey Tom, a renowned Hawaiian scholar, founder of the Life Enhancement Institute of the Pacific, and recognized as a cultural resource and teacher, awarded the Hawaiian Peacemaker of the Year in recognition of his lifetime career of advocating the spirit of aloha. Ramsey is also a practitioner of Lua, the Hawaiian martial arts, and it is with much aloha that we welcome Kahu Tom to offer the opening for our conference. Please welcome him.
Good morning and aloha. Mahalo. Thank you so much. Michael, thank you for that wonderful introduction and for welcoming me back. I guess this is the third time I've got to spend some time with you in this special gathering. I'd like to take a moment just to ask each of you to set aside all the stuff that you might have brought into the room with you. It doesn't even mean giving it away, but just set it aside. Allow yourself to find that quiet place, that center within you, that allows us to be centered in self and not self-centered. The opportunity to be one with self, but also those around you. In Hawaiian, we call that pono, the notion of being connected, of being unified, of being part of something larger. Another word for that is lokahi, to be unified, to be connected. You may not agree all the time, but to work in solidarity. This is the concept of lokahi and being pono. So I ask each of you to do that as I open with this thought, and some might call pule as prayer. To unify our minds, our bodies, our spirits, and to do that through all time, not just while we're here. But when we leave and we go back to our respective places, our families, our communities, our countries, our nations, our cities, and our villages, wherever they may be. So I'm going to ask each of you just to close your eyes for a moment and find that place as I welcome us and ask with this pule. He holiko no kikino a me ka uhane. He malama puno ka manao. Ke ola, ke kino, I ka manawa a pauloa. Alohe, alohe, alohe. Thank you for allowing me to do that. In those words, again, it is unify mind, body, and spirit. That oneness, that connection that allows us to connect to all things around us. As one kupuna would tell me, an elder, to listen carefully, to see without looking, to hear without listening, to feel without touching. Interesting enough, this is aloha. And so let me close with this thought. Michael, thank you again for the introduction. And in that introduction, you mentioned something about Lua. Lua is the tradition of the Hawaiian warrior. And so I might be schizophrenic. I pray on Sundays, I break bones on Monday. But the reality is, in our Lua practice, it was about warriorship. And the foundation behind the Lua warrior was protection. We've realized that at some point, sometimes we have to fight to protect. But fundamentally, it was always about protection. And in this tradition of Lua, We acknowledge that there are polarities that we're always trying to balance within ourselves, as well as the things that are outside of us. On our left, everyone raise your left hand. Put it out to the left. And say Ma. To the left are our ancestors, those that came before us, those that give us our genes, those that give us our identity. Those are our ancestors. It is also the feminine nature of our being, our identity. The hina, the passive, the feminine, that soft part of us. This is called Ma. Everyone say Ma. Raise your right hand, place it out, please, and say Na. Na, this is Kane, this is cool. This is the masculine part of us. This represents our descendants, those that follow, those that come, those who will benefit from our behaviors, or perhaps suffer from them, depending what they may be. These are our descendants, the mo'opuna, our grandchildren, multiple generations down the path. This is called Na. Everyone say Na. Ma, Na. Put your hands together, what do you get? Mana. Mana, the life-giving energy that is in all of us. It is in the places that we come from and the places that we visit. In the spirit of aloha, we leave those places and those that we participate with and join as we do today better than when we found them. To leave them whole, not wanting. This is the spirit of aloha, founded on the mana of our places. Honoring our ancestors and also preparing for our descendants. But clearly, we can't do either. The past and the future. Unless we are present. And in this present, in this moment, to be pono, to be connected, to honor those that we represent and those that we protect. In this moment, be here, be now. And to do that with the spirit of aloha. So let's make some mana. When I say pa'i, clap your hands once. Pa'i. Okay, let's see if we can get it together here. Pa'i. 2 times. Pa'i, pa'i. When I say pa'i kalima, 3 times. Pa'i kalima. Pa'i kalima. Pa'i kalima. Unified. So with that in mind, let's just continue with the mana. Ready, go. Thank you, thank you, thank you. You're just too kind. Aloha and have a wonderful gathering. Best to you. Peace be with you.
That was terrific. Thank you, Kavu. And now it is my pleasure and privilege to introduce to you the President of the Association of the United States Army, General Carter Ham.
Thanks, Michael. Aloha! Ramsey, thank you once again for joining us and getting us off to a great start. I'm thrilled to be back with you. I think all of us are very, very happy to be back in Hawaii for the 6th Land Forces Pacific Conference. And I think we have a couple of folks who have been to all 6. So if you've been to all 6 Land Force Pacific Conferences, stand up, General Soriano. That's right. There we go. Well done. We're glad you're back, and we look forward to seeing you for number 7. Last year at the Land Forces Pacific Conference, Admiral Harry Harris, the commander of United States Pacific Command, announced that AUSA, the sponsoring organization for this conference, was the armiest of all Army organizations. A very proud title that we bear, and we're very happy to do that. You know, some 7 years ago, the Chief of Staff of the United States Army asked our association, the Association of the United States Army, to design a forum to showcase the role of land power in the Pacific. And we're very, very honored to have had the opportunity to do that. And it is your association, as Michael mentioned, the Professional Association of the United States Army, that makes this possible. And Michael was kind about it, but with regard to membership, there is a membership table out front manned by Ms. Christine Lathrop, and I hope that you'll see her But what you'll find is that during the breaks, as you try to get to the restrooms, the membership table will be blocking the access. And so if you show your membership card, access to the restroom. You don't have a membership card, have a nice time at the porta potties. All right? So, no, not really. Well, maybe really. We'll see. We'll see how that all plays out. Well, we are glad and thrilled to be assembled here in 2018. And the theme for our conference for the next couple of days is the future of land force integration, multilateral approaches across the Indo-Pacific region. Multilateral approaches across the Indo-Pacific region. I think that's a great theme. And it takes all of us to do this, as Ramsey has reminded us, that it is our efforts combined together that are most likely to achieve the intended outcomes. So we're particularly proud, I think, this year that we have, General Brown, I believe, 26 other nations other than the United States represented at Land Forces Pacific. And we are very honored and thrilled that you are here. And if I could please ask, for those participants here today who are not from the United States of America, would you please stand and let us thank you for your partnership, for your loyalty, and for your coming here today. So those who are not from the United States. That's right, General Noble, General Saint Michel. Yeah, Australia and Canada are not yet part of the United States. We might get there, but we'll see how that plays out. So anyway, thank you very much for being here. Your presence means a lot to all of us, and I know it means a lot to General Brown and his team. You know, the expanse, both geographic and cultural, the diversity, the complexity of missions across this region highlight the criticality of the Indo-Asia Pacific region. Land forces across this region today, this very day, are engaged in integrated air and missile defense, providing the very backbone of strategic deterrence. Conventional land forces are engaged in multinational operations and training that provide the foundation for regional stability and security. The land forces of many nations represented here this morning are actively engaged in humanitarian or disaster relief operations, providing capabilities that only land forces can deliver. Army, Marine, Special Operating Forces of several nations are today actively conducting counterinsurgency and counter-terrorist and counter-extremist operations across this vast region. The complexity and diversity of these regional challenges are what bring us together for Land Forces Pacific Conference 2018. We'll have the opportunity to hear from and engage with panels of experts on a variety of topics. And these forums are to provide unique opportunities to increase understanding of the security environment, the role that military forces play in the region, and the requirements needed by military forces operating in this critical region of the world. Land Forces Pacific Conference is unique. There's no similar forum in the region that highlights land forces and land power. We at AUSA are very proud to continue to grow this important venue and to make it the premier forum of its kind. But it takes a vast team to pull this together, and it begins with Admiral Harry Harris and his team at United States Pacific Command. We're going to hear soon from General Bob Brown and his great team at U.S. Army Pacific. Lieutenant General Dave Berger's team at Marine Forces Pacific. Major General Daniel Yu's team at Special Operations Command Pacific. Pacific Command Air Force, Pacific Air Forces, and the Pacific Fleet service components in the joint world. This forum is only possible because of the great industry partners who you'll have an opportunity to engage with throughout the next couple of days. And of course, our international partners who we have recognized earlier. Many other U.S. government agencies and other government agencies from our partners are here as well, academic institutions, and of course this great Honolulu community that are here. This conference is simply not feasible, not accomplishable without the great support and sponsorship of many of our great industry partners. This room, for example, sponsored by KBR Wiley, without whose sponsorship this event simply is not possible. And so we thank all of our sponsors for all that they do to make this possible. And I encourage each of you to take time during the day, and we have time specifically allocated for you to interact with and engage with the many exhibitors, both military and industry, who are assembled just next door to us today. So with that, now it's time to begin formally the 2018 Land Forces Pacific Symposium and Exposition. And who would you want to have other than the first keynote speaker, than the host commander, a great leader, a marginal basketball player. Please welcome General Bob Brown.
All right. Well, you know, I recently spoke with my old coach, Coach Mike Krzyzewski at Duke, and I said, hey, I'm pretty excited. I got brand new knees, and I might have a little bit of eligibility left. And he said, well, I'll let North Carolina know the Tar Heels could use you, and we'd love to play against you. So not much confidence there. Well, let's do it again. One more time. You got to wake up this morning. Aloha. Aloha. Yeah, a little bit weak. What do you think, Michael? One more time. Now, you're in Hawaii. For those of you who are stationed here, every morning we ought to pinch ourselves, how lucky we are, a long way from the Pentagon, but also out here in Hawaii. And for the rest of you, let's really wake up this morning. You're in Hawaii. Everybody thinks you're at the beach right now. So give it a good aloha. Later on, go out and at least pick up some sand and enjoy the beach a little bit. Aloha. Aloha. That's fantastic. There we go. Now we're fired up. So, General Ham, thanks so much. Really appreciate it. As you said, the sixth land pack. What a great vision 7 years ago to create this as the Pacific, such a critical theater. As you mentioned, 52% of the Earth's surface, 7 of the 10 largest armies in the world. And another statistic, it's interesting, you look at mega cities of 10 million or more. And here in the Pacific, over half in the world are in the Pacific, with 22 here in the Pacific and growing. So there'll be more than anywhere else in the Pacific region. So land forces so key, all forces critical, of course, working together. But really, this is a great vision. I want to thank AUSA. As was mentioned, we couldn't do it without the Association of the United States Army, and really appreciate the great teamwork. Sir General Ham, thanks. Great vision. And we've been working since the end of last year's do a little after-action review on how do we make this year's even better, and I'm happy to say I'm sure it is. As you mentioned, 26 nations, biggest crowd ever, just absolutely terrific. And 60 industry partners here. Thank you for joining us. And first of all, thanks for all you're doing to help us ensure that our soldiers have what they need to go into harm's way, what they need for any task they have out there. And I would just encourage you, please get by and visit the floor. You'll see some amazing exhibits and the latest and greatest in technology. I'm excited already. Was popping in there, and they weren't quite ready yet, but I'll be there right afterwards. They're all set now. And take the time to go to the exhibit. You'll be happy you did. And thanks for joining us, our industry partners. Absolutely key. Also, I'm proud this year we'll have a little off-site from here, and up at Schofield Barracks we'll have a little satellite land pack soldier-specific financial forum for those soldiers and families up at Schofield and others on the island. Some 20,000 will be able to enjoy that, so that's a great first. I also want to thank, I think he's out there somewhere, our civilian aide to the Secretary of the Army, Alan Ho, who put on a great polo demonstration last night, and we saw some of the world's best polo players. Really appreciate that for him, and he does amazing things helping our Army. And then the whole Land Pack Planning Committee has done just a fantastic job. Thanks for all of your hard work. And the Sheraton Waikiki does a great job putting up with a lot of our needs, and they're incredibly flexible. So, you know, the best thing here is that here at Land Pack, with the folks you can interact with, 26 nations, and the great panels and forums we'll have, you can get more accomplished than if you traveled the Pacific for 3 to 4 months going to countries to try to meet people. So really smart to be here, and let's really take advantage of that and make sure we're interacting because, as I'll talk about in a few minutes, these problems are complex out there and we need to work together as a team. That's absolutely for sure. We've got some terrific keynote speakers. We'll have General Steve Townsend, and he was very upset. He got called to a meeting in the Pentagon, but he's going to VTC in because we did not want to miss. Steve Townsend's a tremendous leader, our training and doctrine commander, and he'll be on here this morning and have a lot to say that's incredibly beneficial for all of us. And then Army Material Command Commander General Gus Perna, who's an amazing leader. He'll be here to speak tomorrow. So some great speakers. Panel-wise, I just pulled out, I'm not going to go over all the panels, but there's some great ones. We'll lead off, Ron Clark will lead the team off here with looking at the shared regional security challenges and opportunities out there right after this. And then we'll have later panels. General Valesky will lead, the First Corps Commander, on perspectives of land forces and combined joint operations. A terrific panel there with experts from across the board. We'll also have a exporting global partnership through senior enlisted development, professionalism. Command Sergeant Major Jones, the U.S. Army Pacific Command Sergeant Major, will lead that, and that'll be a great panel. And it's really, there's an area that's just taken off, and I'm looking forward to hearing their thoughts. We'll hear non-kinetic power projection from Lieutenant General Dickinson, Space and Missile Defense Command, and really glad that he's out here, and that'll be a terrific panel as well. Multi-domain operations, sustainment, regional leaders for a complex world, and multinational approaches to HADR, some of the other panels. And then the forums you mentioned, again, I won't go over all of them, but there's some great ones on multi-domain operations, the soldier advantage panel on some of the things happening to give soldiers an advantage. That'll be extremely interesting. And then employing social media is another forum, and there's several others that are just terrific. So if you get a chance on the forums, I would definitely recommend that, and the panels as well in here will be absolutely terrific. Well, General Ham mentioned this year's theme, and it's a good one. You know, the future of land force integration, multilateral approaches across the Indo-Pacific. Multilateral. You know, it couldn't come at a better time. The future is multilateral. You're going to hear me say that over and over again, because that's one thing I am absolutely certain of. Multilateral solutions to these complex problems. You know, 1 or 2 decades ago, we had many of our engagements were bilateral. Everything was nation-nation, and that, you know, there's some advantages to that, but the challenge is, as the world gets more complex, bilateral isn't going to work. It will not work, whether it's humanitarian assistance, disaster response, whether it's violent extremists that you're trying to prevent and be ready to stop, or whether it's you know, all-out conflict. Multilateral is definitely the way to go, and we've moved from bilateral to multilateral. We're really at an inflection point in history. When you look at it, warfare is changing. And this complex world that has developed out there has changed many of the characteristics. For example, when you look, success is really, we used to say success kind of like being comfortable in ambiguity and chaos. Well, comfort doesn't work anymore. When you look at this world, it's so complex. If you want to succeed with these complex challenges, you have to have individuals that thrive in ambiguity and chaos. Not that are comfortable, but that thrive. And with the complexity out there, the professional aspect of armies is more important than ever, and the ability to have trusted teams of professionals. Any one individual, Private Brown out there, does something, it can be on CNN around the world that night. The professionalism required. So trusted teams of professionals that thrive in ambiguity and chaos is absolutely critical. And what's caused the character of war to change during our lifetimes? You're looking at here the complexity of the brightness there is connectivity on the internet. Now, if you looked at that just a few years ago, there would be about a tenth as much of the connectivity that you see there. That's the current connectivity around the world on the internet. Back in 2002, you would have barely seen any lighted areas there, really Europe and the United States portions only connected, and little bits and pieces here and there. So, big deal. Things are connected. Well, it's changed the very velocity of human interaction. You know, there's no doubt about it. The Internet of Things, this access. It's changed the fog of war. Fog of war used to be not enough information. You know, you would get one or two pieces of information, and quite honestly, it was easier to have initiative because let's do something, do anything. You only have one or two. Nobody's going to critique you. You only got one or two pieces of info. Well, what's a fog of war now? What causes a fog of war now? Anybody? Too much information. You know, how many, 200 emails you get a day, the overwhelming amounts of information that come in from sources everywhere. And the challenge now is to find the value in all that information. You know, haystacks of information, where are the golden needles you need to make a decision, to make a difference? How do you sort through that? And we're seeing it done with artificial intelligence, many ways, but that has changed the fog of war. And it's also changed, you know, if everybody connected there in that complexity, to the internet, if everybody was doing good, that'd be a wonderful thing. Holy smokes, that'd be fantastic. However, they're not. Some of them are trying to steal your money. Some of them are working all kinds of ways to cause harm and give themselves an advantage, not follow the rules-based international order, if you will. And unfortunately, many times those that would do us harm can actually be faster than we can because they lie. You know, and the old saying, a lie travels halfway around the world while the truth is still putting on its shoes. When you're putting stuff out on the internet, when you're putting information out, most people want to tell the truth, and it's going to be slower than those who don't worry about lying, who want to do you harm. Of course, there's a new saying, too, the old saying about a lie travels fast, a new saying that perception can change at the speed of a tweet. How quickly around the world perception can change. Again, things that have changed in complexity in our world, no doubt about it. And what we see now is these things called black swans that come out of nowhere, that people don't expect. When I was younger, if you got hit with a black swan, you failed. You weren't a good planner. You weren't anticipating. Now, I don't care who you are. You can anticipate these things that happen because of the speed of interaction, the velocity that is out there in this complexity. You can't predict it. You are going to get hit by a black swan. I mean, just take a look at events around the world over the last year. Nobody could have predicted the outcome of many of the things that have happened, let alone things like natural disasters as well that come out of nowhere. It seems more than ever at a level that's greater than ever before. So in addition to the normal cast of bad actors, we have to also contend in the Pacific with Mother Nature. And the 2016 UN report said that by 2020, here in the Pacific, 1 billion people living in the Indo-Pacific region will reside in a disaster-prone area classified as high to extreme risk. 1 billion in those high to extreme risk areas. And unfortunately, tragically, we know 7 out of 10 people killed in the world in a disaster, it occurs in the Pacific region. So we have humanitarian assistance and disaster response, something that we're going to face. It's hard to believe, as you look back, that it was 7 years ago what happened as an example in Japan. Japan suffered a devastating earthquake, tsunami, and nuclear disaster. And it was interesting. I remember talking to individuals after it happened, and several, one Japanese Ground Self-Defense Force general said, you know, they were looking at an exercise about a year before this happened, and they were going to make it pretty complex and put in an earthquake, a tsunami, and then they thought, well, no, it's just not realistic. We won't get the credibility when we do this. And then it happened. Again, black swans out of nowhere, this level like never before. And when you look, the tsunami that hit the wave ran up to 128 feet in height, 6 miles inland, and flooded 217 square miles. The tsunami caused the cooling system failure, level 7 nuclear meltdown, and the president of the Economic Union said, an earthquake powerful enough to make the world wobble on its axis, a massive tsunami, and emergency and nuclear power stations, any one of these would have been a tragedy, but they were all together. They all happened. Well, the good news is many, many nations, multilateral approach came together to work and to help the people in Japan in their time of need. And it didn't just come out of nowhere, 20-plus nations. It came from the efforts working together before. You don't start a relationship in a crisis. Hopefully you have a great relationship, and then you come together in that crisis. You can't form that relationship in the crisis. So 20-plus nations helping Japan and working closely together would make the difference as they experience that. And then just 3 years ago, a few years after that, we had the earthquake in Nepal. 8,700 tragically killed during that earthquake, about 2,000 injured, and 600,000 houses destroyed. An earthquake that rocked Nepal. Now, in this case, multilateral, again, 34 nations would assist and join that effort to help the people of Nepal. So here you are again, the most likely thing that will happen in the Pacific, humanitarian assistance, disaster response. And under the direction of the Nepalese Army, a multinational military coordination center was formed. Multinational military coordination center, critical. In all the after-action reports it talked about that ability to pull folks together, working together, again, who had relationships from working together across the Pacific, enabled the assistance to go where it was targeted and not be wasted, and help the people in Nepal in their time of incredible need. In fact, the international teams, and specifically 18 military teams, provided rescue assistance, medical treatment for nearly 30,000 people, evacuated 4,000, delivered 966 tons of relief, and given the location of Nepal, would have had major issues delivering that relief if it wasn't for the intermediate staging base that Thailand offered with the Thai Navy airfield. That was critical. Again, it didn't just happen, though. Those relationships were there. And so individuals, they were able to take advantage of that intermediate staging base and save lives. Now, these type operations don't come without risk, and tragically, we lost 6 Marines and 2 Nepalese soldiers in a helicopter crash, and they'll be forever in our thoughts and prayers. These operations don't come without risk. It was incredibly successful, but they're also still incredibly risky, and multilateral is the absolute key. And then you take a look at exercises around the region, and again, in this, from disaster response to exercises, it's moved from bilateral to multilateral. Multilateral is the future with the complexity in the world today. Partnerships are more important than ever, and these exercises, when you look, Cobra Gold, as an example, in Thailand, had about 300 folks outside Thailand participating back in 1984. Now there's 9,000 in last year's Cobra Gold, 9 major nations participating and other observers, and then projected to be 12,000 participating in 2019. Multilateral, from bilateral to multilateral, solving these problems. Same with Balikatan in the Philippines, an exercise that's gone from bilateral to multilateral with multiple nations participating, absolutely key. Also, if you look, U.S. Army Pacific, for example, back about 10 years ago, did about 13 different exercises, a majority bilateral. And now we're up to 43 and all multilateral in some form or another. Some, you still bilateral, but observers where there's multiple nations there, and then others where there are 30-plus nations involved. Absolutely key. One major example is RIMPAC. All right, traditionally naval exercise, and PAC Fleet, the largest maritime exercise in the world until this summer. And thankfully, working together with Pacific Fleet and Pacific Command, RIMPAC has turned into the largest multinational combined joint exercise in the world, as we'll actually have multiple domains, not just air and sea, and mostly sea, but air, sea, land, space, and cyber in this year's RIMPAC. And that's a result of training the way we're going to fight, multilateral, in all domains, and actually pretty amazing, you know, RIMPAC was 14 nations in 2010, and now in 2018, 26 nations will participate in this year's RIMPAC. Multilateral is the future, and again, that's in all domains as we move forward. And interestingly enough, as you look at the leadership for RIMPAC, Third Fleet, a U.S. Third Fleet, will have command, but working with the Third Fleet Commander, be senior leaders in key positions from Japan, Canada, Australia, Chile, Republic of Korea, and New Zealand, all in key positions within the chain of command right there in RIMPAC. Another example, Conquest. The land force commander from Mongolia is here, and I've had the honor to be at a couple of conquests. Again, amazing to see it go from bilateral to over 30 nations in this last year's conquest in Mongolia, pulling together this incredibly complex exercise where nations are working together, and it makes a huge difference in building those trusted teams of professionals that can thrive in ambiguity and chaos they're going to face. There's also real-world examples. And I'll use the example of the extremist threat when you look in the Sulu Sea. So there was a seam in the Sulu Sea that developed, and violent extremists were exploiting this seam. Bad actors just trying to make money were exploiting this seam. And some of the challenges with this were, you know, as the Philippines, Malaysia, and Indonesia were dealing with this, the actual rules, international rules-based order, hurt them because they'd get an individual in their economic exclusion zone in their area, and they would pass a seam, and they couldn't pursue them. And so these individuals were exploiting that seam in the Sulu Sea. And it wasn't good. As you saw, we all know the situation in Marawi with violent extremists. Unfortunately, the Philippines, very successful there in stopping that effort. But this Sulu Sea was a real challenge. So working together, the trilateral cooperative arrangement in April 2017 between Malaysia, Indonesia, and the Philippines has stopped this seam. Now they're working together, sharing intelligence, preventing that gap, and violent extremists and other bad actors from taking advantage of this area. So multilateral efforts across the board, absolutely key, and that ability to be multilateral and work together. You cannot do it alone. These are complex problems. We have a crisis in a crisis, it has a way of highlighting those friendships. But what we do every day to nurture our multinational partnerships are even more critical. And we're doing that right here, right now. As I mentioned, we've heard several times, 26 nations here, we're building those multinational relationships, working together right here, right now. And I've said it already, but there's no question. That is key. The future is multilateral. It has to be, as none of us can afford to go it alone. And quite honestly, it doesn't make sense to go at it alone. It does not make sense. Multilateral. Only through multilateral partnerships with nations equally committed to basic civil freedoms and to international rules-based order that we will ensure safety and stability for the billions of people who deserve a chance at their best lives in the Pacific region. You know, our strong military-to-military relationships are now bolstered by interagency and intergovernmental presence. And so I'm excited by the strides we have made working together, no doubt, whole-of-nation approaches for tough, demanding, complex problems. And we each serve a common and singular purpose, to promote peace and prosperity in the Indo-Pacific region. So the cornerstone of all these operations from here on out are those trusted teams of professionals that thrive in ambiguity and chaos, working together, multinational teams. And no doubt that I'm excited to begin it here at LandPAC and keep it going out there in real world and exercises and training so we can form those relationships before we get to a crisis where that teamwork is needed more than ever. Thanks for joining us here. Thanks for helping us be a part of those multilateral, multinational solutions that will make all the difference in the world and ensure that this region that has prospered so much remains that way as we work together to solve these complex problems. So I would say, General Ham, let's get started, get the panels going, and get some solutions as we work together to solve these complex problems. Thank you very much. Now, I hope Michael listened to me. Last year, he gave me these really tough questions. I said, no more tough questions this year. Make them easy ones, but he couldn't do that. He's going to make some tough ones. So let me see here now. Ooh, this is tough handwriting. Get my glasses out here. Another, you know you're getting old. Can't read it without glasses. Okay. Multi-domain command and control, and the Army has committed to multi-domain battle in the Pacific. What lessons did you learn from air-sea battle that you're applying to multi-domain and across the board? So I would say, that's a great question. And the multi-domain operations, I'll call it, we've been going back and forth battle, but it looks like multi-domain operations is clearly more inclusive. And so I'll use that term as we've shifted from battle to operations. Clearly is evolutionary in nature. And it has learned from air-sea battle. It's learned from air-land battle prior to it. And what's key is the complexity I was just describing that requires folks to work together is not just, again, multilateral, multinational, but multi-domain. And we have individuals out there that have studied air-land battle and ways that appear very linear in nature and predictable. And these complex problems we're facing that I talked about a few minutes ago, they're going to require innovative approaches and the ability to present multiple dilemmas to an enemy and maneuver in multiple domains to a position of advantage. I think the key aspect. To think of maneuver on the ground, where you maneuver on the ground to a position of relative advantage, well then take that to maneuvering in cyber to a position of relative advantage, maneuvering in space to a position of relative advantage. That may open up maneuver in another domain to a position of relative advantage. And what we're finding in lessons as we're going through multiple exercises, tabletop simulations, we're finding, first of all, a significant difference in capabilities and options for the commander. You're not limited, much less predictable. No question that this has been an evolutionary from the traditional air, land, sea to include cyber and space. And I would say what we're finding is cyber and space offer the most promising capabilities. And these are things that, looking at past methods and doctrine and concepts that we're finding are jumping right out and a significant difference. Now, there are challenges. We grow up in stovepipes. For the United States military, we're extremely joint, but still not joint enough. We have platforms that need to be, and I'll steal Pac Fleet, Admiral Swift brilliantly captured it as, sensor agnostic and platform agnostic. So no matter what sees it, it can share it with the other services and other platforms, be it a Navy P-8 that can share info with an Army artillery unit or a Air Force or Marine or Special Ops. This is what we need to truly be joint and conduct multi-domain operations in a manner that can present multiple dilemmas and give us a significant advantage. But it is an evolutionary process. All the concepts before have helped provide great feedback. Next question. Multilateral efficiency and effectiveness demands jointness. We're just talking about doctrine, training, interoperability, survivability, et cetera. What's changing to make this a reality? It's different even across U.S. services, much less among allied forces. How will we succeed? So that really is it's like those two questions were together. I agree completely. We've got to move to, it's not easy. Change is never easy. Dealt with change over time, had the 2nd Stryker Brigade in the Army did the concept test evaluation of the entire concept of Stryker and a new way to fight, if you will. And folks will say they want change, They want you to change, they don't want to change. So it's not easy. I'm not saying it's going to be easy, but we have to change as we move forward and develop these concepts and look at how we can be less predictable, how we can improve that jointness to give us more options. And multi-domain operations does that in an evolutionary manner. And I couldn't agree more that in this question it talks about it's not just training, it's the doctrine, it's the training, it's the interoperability, it's the leader development. It's a different way to develop leaders, much more jointness from an early age so that you're not in a stovepipe. And we have ink spots of greatness out there occurring. We've got to pull those together and make them all work together and move forward to continue to be successful in the future. And I have a lot of confidence we can do that. Multinational partners, the thing I've seen in the Pacific as we've been working this, they are very excited and in many cases pushing us. They see the exact same thing and they're pushing us to move forward with multi-domain operations, realizing the advantages that it has and what can be done. We've got a long way to go, but we're making progress, and I think you'll hear much more about it in several of the panels and a forum that's going to talk about multi-domain operations and then also the multi-domain task force, a task force design to go forward and with new capabilities like in the task force at a higher level like intelligence, cyber, electronic warfare, and space, never done before, and they'll be in one of the forums. They'll talk about the results so far of multi-domain task force and what we've seen from that here in the next couple of days. So lots of opportunity to keep these questions going, keep this discussion going, and I would encourage it from everybody. And this is the type of thing you couldn't do alone, and you certainly wouldn't want to do in a bilateral, that you want to work multilaterally, multinationally, and really whole-of-government approach to these tough problems. So thanks for the questions. That's it, Michael. You did give me some easy ones. All right, we're done. On to the next one. He's pulling me off the stage. Thanks very much. Look forward to working with you on the event.
Well, thanks, General Brown. Thanks for getting us off to a great start. I think I've had the privilege of knowing General Brown for a long time, and those of you who have had the opportunity to serve with him, I think one of his great attributes is impatience. All right, if you want to drive change, you cannot be a particularly patient person. And General Brown's drive to continually emphasize the need to change individually and collectively, I think, has been very helpful for the Army, if not discomforting at times. But we each need that. So thanks. Ramsey and General Brown both kind of talked about this theme of and remind us that we're all in this together. And I think that sets the stage for our first panel for this morning, titled Assessing Shared Regional Security Challenges and Opportunities. And we're privileged that today the panel moderator is the G2 of United States Army Pacific, Colonel Jason Chung, and the panel chair for our first panel is Major General Ron Clark, Commanding General 25th Infantry Division. I had the privilege, I was just thinking, General Clark, 18 years ago, I had the opportunity to meet Major Clark. And one of the things that many of you in this room know that sometimes in unusual places, in unusual circumstance, you come across leaders, you say, there's something different, there's something special about this leader. And I'll tell you that in 2000, some of us saw then in Major Clark the things that have led him to become Major General Clark. And Ron, we're very proud of you and welcome you and Colonel Chung to introduce the remainder of your panel. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome General Clark and Colonel Chung.
Thank you for that warm introduction. I appreciate you not identifying the circumstances of our first meeting, where it was a grand occasion to identify the fact that I'm a graduate of Leesville High School, the little high school right outside of Fort Polk, Louisiana. So, sir, again, thanks for the intro. I'll turn the introduction to our panel over to Jason Chung.
Aloha kakayaka. Good morning and welcome to Panel 1, Assessing Shared Regional Security Challenges and Opportunities. I'm Colonel Jason Chung, your moderator. And before I turn it over to our distinguished Panel 1 members, I kind of want to frame the purpose for Panel 1. So Panel 1 is really the strategic scene setter for LAMPAC 2018. It's the why we are all here. It's because the Indo-Pacific region is complex, it's uncertain, it's dangerous. It's the most consequential region in the world today. Consider the amount and density of people, the preponderance of global commerce and trade, the strategic maritime routes. Our common security and prosperity are indelibly linked to this critical region. So this region is complex. It's due to the diversity, the density, the amount of people, the growing economies and markets, and the impending competition for resources. It's uncertain. It's multiplayer. Actions by each individual, intended, unintended, have consequences for us all. It's multifaceted, multi-domain, and multi-generational game. We face dilemmas in this region, and there are no easy solutions. This region is dangerous. We have bad actors with bad intentions. North Korea, Russia, China, violent extremist organizations, and of course this thing called natural disaster, which 40% occur annually within this region, having a significant impact on our people and their way of life. Therefore, we assembled Panel 1, a diverse group of experts to provide a glimpse or preview of the complexity of this region, underlying why a deliberate and multilateral approach is required to turn these challenges and dilemmas into opportunities. So Panel 1's success will be measured by the audience's desire and interest to participate in the subsequent LAMPAC panels and forums. So at this time, I'd like to pass it off to the Panel 1 chair, Major General Ron Clark.
Thanks, Jason. First, this panel is a great dovetail to General Brown's opening comments. And as panel chair, I'd like to provide a strategic overview of some of the complex challenges that are multifaceted, multiplayer, multi-domain, and multi-generational that really represent this environment and why we need an absolute team approach and multilateral approach when dealing with them. Our challenges in the Indo-Asia-Pacific region are multiplayer and multifaceted. As our chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Joseph Dunford, described U.S. national defense strategy as a 4+1 construct with regard to national security challenges and readiness and the requirements that we all have as militaries. The four in the construct are China, Russia, North Korea, and Iran. The +1 is violent extremist organizations. He wasn't implying that we're going to fight any of those nations, though we've certainly been in a fight for a considerable period of time with violent extremist organizations alongside our partners and allies for quite a while now. The challenges of the 4+1 construct represent the benchmark for preparation as we consider and focus what we need to do and as we conquer these challenges that are both known and unknown and will most likely occur. When we consider the focus of the 4+1 construct, it's interesting to point out that 3 of the nations, along with violent extremist activity and organizations, are present in the Indo-Asia-Pacific region. As we examine this more closely, we see that materializing in this fight is a fight for influence and access across multiple facets in the use of all instruments of power. Revisionist powers like China and Russia are utilizing those same instruments of power, such as economic incentives, diplomacy, informational warfare, and military activities to expand their influence in the region. In the case of China, we see this manifesting itself with respect to their actions in South China Sea and the expansion of the Belt Road Initiative. For Russia, they seek increased influence through economic overtures across Oceania. And North Korea's actions, despite diplomatic ongoing efforts, further complicate regional security situation, and though we're hopeful that our diplomatic efforts are going to go very well, we're optimistic that these efforts will be fruitful, but we have to remain ready. And let's not forget the challenge of violent extremist organizations and the efforts that they oppose as they foment violence and continue to spread hateful ideology across the region. The challenges in this region will affect more than just our militaries. It will, in fact, touch all aspects of national power and will test all of our national will. A key to understanding the region and its challenges are first to understand its history, the underlying economic issues, and social structures. In considering ways to meet the challenges, we must integrate and address instruments of national power, diplomatic, informational, military, and economic, in a whole-of-government approach to address these complex issues. So our approach must be multi-domain. As soldiers and professional military civilians, it's important to understand what General Brown pointed out in his intro, that 7 of the 10 largest armies in the world reside in this region and are predominantly the largest branch of service in all of our nations. Even in a region consisting mostly of water, 4 billion of its residents still live on land and are required to have strong land forces within their countries to provide security and stability. So despite technological advantages, we can never discount the importance of human interaction. It's about the relationships that we as land forces forge and continue to develop, even as we acknowledge the importance of the air, maritime, and cyber domains to the region. We can never discount the relationships and interactions that we as leaders have with one another, as it sows the seeds that, if properly sown, lead to interoperability and ultimately integration together as allies and partners. We must take a multilateral approach while recognizing that, as General Brown pointed out, our bilateral relationships are and will remain key as a foundational component to the security and stability of our region. The dilemmas we face today and in the future will require a team approach, because the environment is so dynamic and is growing so complex, uncertain, and dangerous that we have to build relationships now that we may need to leverage in the future. So as it's often said, it's sometimes too late to make friends when you need them. Therefore, through a multilateral approach, many of us standing together, shoulder to shoulder, can make a lasting impact in this region. Our approach must be multi-generational, because there are no short-term solutions to the dilemmas and challenges we face in the region. Our collective efforts together foster and maintain security, stability, and provide a prosperous future for generations to follow, and it requires coherent strategy and constant engagement to take into consideration generational as well as cultural needs and expectations. To wrap up this scene setter and introduce to our panel of experts, our relationships must grow, endure, and mature to effectively anticipate emerging dilemmas and challenges in the Pacific. We must strive for integration across relationships, domains, and generations. And when we achieve this, we can be better prepared for the challenges and uncertainty that accompanies them. Now, we're fortunate today to have an incredible group of panelists to share their perspectives on the region and why we must have a multilateral approach to address our future in the region. Jason.
Sir, thank you for these comments. Now, so we can dive deep into one of the 4+1 challenges that was mentioned, I'd like to get the perspective from General Chonenbong.
Thank you very much, and good morning. I'm Lieutenant General Retired Chun. I'm from Korea, and I'm a lifelong member of AUSA. A challenge for a Korean like me is the general tendency of non-Koreans and even Koreans to focus on North Korea, when actually on the Korean Peninsula we have 2 entities, which is North Korea and the Republic of Korea. The Republic of Korea is a very vibrant democracy, and I emphasize the word vibrant because it implies that there are many, many opinions. Right now, for lack of a better word, South Korea is divided. We're trying to find out who we are. And because one of your allies is in this kind of situation, It takes prudence for you to look at your ally and work with your ally. So when you hear sound bites from ABC, CNN, Fox, or whatever, please remember what the U.S. Marines used to say during the Pacific War. Believe a quarter of what you hear and half of what you see, and make your decisions prudently. So I ask you, when you hear about South Korea, remember those words of wisdom from the U.S. Marines. Next slide, please. Next slide. This slide is often used to compare the Korean Peninsula as to the development of the South and the situation in North Korea. But today I would like to talk to you about a North Korean caste system, which is called the Seongbun. So the North Koreans legally put into place a caste system in their country since the early 60s. It is divided into 3 categories and subdivided now into 45 categories. The first category is the core. This is about 28% of the North Koreans, or about 6 to 7 million of them. These are the revolutionaries, the heroes of the Republic, and party members, and etc. So about half of them live in the bright spot that you see in North Korea, which is Pyongyang. The second category is their basic category, or sometimes in the old days, they used to refer to them as the complex. This category is descendants of merchants and salesmen, Chinese and Japanese descendants, and religious people, and etc. So the North Koreans categorized them and said, well, these people, we can subvert them, but we always have to keep an eye on them. And this is about 45%. And the third category is the complex, or the hostile. This is about 25%. These are descendants of landowners, religious people, and criminals. And of this 27%, 200,000 of them, we believe, are political prisoners who are in horrendous conditions in concentration camps in North Korea. So in a nutshell, 72% of North Korea is being ruled by the rest of the 28%. So when we hear that 2 or 3 million North Koreans survived, guess who starved to death? It was the ones that they wanted to get rid of in the first place. So I just wanted to introduce that this is a characteristic of North Korea that should be well known. Next slide, please. So this is North Korea. It's mountainous, and they have 3 major rivers that we need to overcome. It's like the Potomac. It's not like the Mississippi, but these are considerable rivers that need to be thought through if you are going to ever travel into North Korea. Next slide. Some of the land hardware, tanks and APCs. Now, it'll take us maybe a week to take them out if we can find them. But I posted these photos because I want you to notice what they have, those man-pads. So every North Korean vehicle seems to have man-pads on them. We believe that there are more than 10,000 man-pads spread around the entire country. For me, as a prior military guy, I don't foresee helicopters flying in daytime in North Korea just because of this man-pad threat. Now, U.S. helicopters have directional countermeasures, but the South Koreans don't have them. And if any other ally is intending on sending helicopters to South Korea or to the Korean Peninsula, make sure that they have countermeasures for man-pads, because if you don't, it's going to be very dangerous flying in Korean airspace. Next slide. Now, we're all focused on nuclear weapons, and Dr. Bennett is going to talk more about them, but North Korea is a nuclear power. We got ourselves into that. They have missiles, a lot of them, and a huge variety of them, and they have chemical and biological weapons. Next slide. Ladies and gentlemen, North Korea is a cyber superpower. I say again, they are a cyber superpower. This is a bigger threat. So I'm increasing the threat level that I see is big of a threat to us. So even more than the nuclear weapon or chemical weapons, I see cyber as a bigger threat to us than ever before. It's not just the cyber threat. So a couple of years back, we South Koreans used to have problems with our GPS. We don't have that problem anymore because they don't jam us. And why do you think they don't jam us? I think they perfected GPS jamming capability. They have other electronic technologies. I personally feel that the North Koreans are as innovative as the Israelis. So this threat is very, very serious. And I just want to conclude on this slide by saying again that North Korea is a cyber superpower. Next slide. But the biggest problem that I see is the North Korean people. They are heavily indoctrinated, they are brainwashed, and they have a network of mutual surveillance that would put the East Germans to shame. And there is a sense of patriotism in there that's inherent in any culture and any people. And it's in the human nature that you don't want foreign forces on your ground. So if we're going to have to go into North Korea, it's going to be a tough nut to crack. But another problem that we have is the total contempt that the North Koreans have for the United States, South Koreans like myself, and the rest of the world. And we have to understand where this contempt comes from. So after the Korean War, which the North Koreans won, in 1968, they hijacked a U.S. ship on international waters, and it was the Pueblo. They actually thought that the United States was going to bomb them. They told the embassies to disperse, they built bunkers, and the U.S. did nothing. They thought, gee, we can get away with this. The next year, they shot down a U.S. intelligence aircraft, and again, the United States showed patience. And again, they took it as weakness. In 1973, when they saw Vietnam going down, they thought, wow, the United States can be beaten. It was only in '76, when the axe murders occurred, that the North Koreans actually said they regretted what happened. And it was only because B-52s were flying over the Korean Peninsula. So there is a lesson to be learned. But bottom line, all the patience that the United States has shown to the North Koreans has translated into their minds and to their propaganda that the United States is weak and that they can take advantage of this. And so this is the portion that really concerns me. Every country in the short U.S. history has made the mistake of taking the United States for granted. Next slide. This is the final slide. So, you know, what is the answer? What is the weakest link to the North Koreans? Well, you know, they're human too, you know. So I firmly believe that the way ahead on the North Korean problem is not bombing them, but information operations. And probably after they collapse with our information operations, civil affairs. But these are two areas that, you know, not only the U.S. Army, but the South Koreans are not putting enough emphasis on. So we really need to think about this, you know. Information operations, using the truth, and civil affairs to make sure that our initial success holds on. In the 1959 movie Ben-Hur, Tribune Masala takes command of a garrison in Jerusalem, and his predecessor laments how these Jews are religious fanatics. And Masala answers, you ask how you fight an idea, and he says, you fight an idea with another idea. We have the greatest idea on earth, which is democracy and freedom. It's absurd that we cannot, beat the North Korean ideology of communism and totalitarianism. So I would ask that we use our brains and we use our good faith to beat the North Koreans. Thank you.
Sir, thank you for those your perspective and sharing your thoughts. And now we'd like to dig down a little deeper into what arguably has changed the cost and calculus of conflict from just on the peninsula to the region and really global impacts, and look at the asymmetric capabilities of ballistic missile and nuclear threat North Korea poses. Dr. Bennett?
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be with you today. If I could have the next slide, please. I'm going to talk about some of the challenges we face with regard to Korea, but only a couple of the newer challenges that we are focusing on. Next, please. We look at the concern about North Korean nuclear weapon use, and you've got to understand it in context. If North Korea uses a 10 kiloton, roughly, nuclear weapon, Hiroshima size, or the size roughly of their first 5 nuclear tests, you're going to get a significant amount of damage in any South Korean city, but in Seoul, over 300,000 people who would be killed or seriously injured. Next, please. But if they then turn to the size of their 6 nuclear tests last September, up to 250 kilotons, now you're talking about potentially 3.5 million people killed or seriously injured. This is not a small deal. The administration is very concerned about these weapons for really good reasons. Next, please. And of course, it's not just the nuclear weapons we've got to be concerned about. We've been very concerned about those, but chemical and biological could also be major issues. And you might say, well, how in the world do you get a ton of chemical weapons into Seoul? Well, one North Korean 240 millimeter multiple rocket launcher battery can lay down 2.5 tons. And there are roughly 30 of those batteries within range of Seoul. So these numbers are at the very low end. Next, please. We finally have to understand North Korean culture. In 1993, we had the first nuclear crisis with North Korea. In that crisis, Kim Il-sung called together his senior military people, and he asked them, if we fight the Americans and we lose, what do we do? Now, his military people were smart enough to know that was a good time to keep their mouths shut. But his son, Kim Jong-il, spoke up and said, if we lose, I will be sure to destroy the earth. What good is the earth without North Korea? That statement is still posted in multiple places in Pyongyang, according to the senior defectors I've talked to. It is a part of the culture. Next, please. Now, we may think, well, but this is for intimidation of South Korea. According to the Korea Institute of Defense Analyses, in a recent publication, target number 1 in South Korea is U.S. Camp Humphreys. That is the most important target for North Korea right now, and North Korea has many reasons for using nuclear weapons at the very beginning of a campaign. If they put a 250 kiloton weapon on Camp Humphreys, you can see it's largely devastated. Even up to the right there, the train symbol, that's the big train station we would be trying to take our NEO out of, and even it is within the nuclear effects radii. So this is a big deal for our military as well. Next, please. Now I'm going to turn next to talking a little bit about China as an issue. We've been reluctant over time to talk much about third-party intervention, but the reality is Xi Jinping has said that he will not allow war or chaos on the peninsula. Now, he can't stop missile launches. How does he stop war or chaos? And I think the only answer is boots on the ground. Now, historically, we thought about it in terms of North Korea coming in, and next, please. They've talked about going 50 or 100 kilometers into the north to create a buffer zone. so that refugees don't flood into North Korea. And usually Chinese speakers in conferences then go on to say, oh yeah, and we'd also police up the weapons of mass destruction. Next, please. But if you look at those frontages, they are way too wide. No Army person is going to want to have that kind of front against South Korea and U.S. forces moving north. My sense is they will probably move to the narrow neck, the green line here. They may be prepared to withdraw from that. The area north of that is not particularly productive. It's not an independent country, so eventually they might withdraw, but there are some challenges in that. Next, please. We also see some evidence that they might decide to go as far as Pyongyang. If they want to put a new government in to replace the North Korean government, this is likely what they would do. So there are various things they could do. We don't know their plans, and they could change their plans in a contingency. Next, please. Now, we also have to be concerned about the Russian forces. Russians could cross close to the border. They only have about an 18-kilometer border with North Korea. One bridge across that border, which is a single-track rail bridge. So they're limited in what they can do, but they could also move down the coastline as they did at the end of World War II to intervene. Next, please. Now, as we look at the ways that these interventions could occur, we have to be concerned about how do we avoid the development of World War III. We've got to be concerned and say, do we set a boundary line for Chinese advance and our advance? We did that in Germany at the end of World War II. It didn't have a great impact for the next decades. But do we have to do something like that here to avoid conflict? Next, please. And even if we do that, special forces will be projected beyond that line. What happens when we run into Chinese special forces or they run into ours? Do we shake hands or have a more disastrous outcome? Next, please. We have to understand as well that the procedures we use in occupied areas will matter. If the Chinese are more permissive, if they're more friendly with the people, that's not going to go well with our efforts to move in and deal with what almost certainly will involve an insurgency of some form. Next, please. And of course, you've got the Russians adding on top of that. What role do they play? Do they cooperate with the Chinese, or could there be conflict there as well? Next, please. Now, China has recently reformed, and they've changed and created a Northern Theater Command. I would offer just one important observation about this. When the forces to the immediate west of North Korea have been combined into a single command for China, what's the impact of that? Are they combined, and in particular with an amphibious capable group army and perhaps supported by the airborne group army, so that they could go after Pyongyang and not force the forces coming down across the border to do that, allowing the forces coming across the border to actually go after the WMD? Again, Chinese talk about that in conferences. They may well be prepared to do that. Next, please. I would argue that we have to be very concerned that China's probably going to do this, and we've got to have a plan. Because ultimately, we would like to see Korea unified, all of Korea, but in order to do that, there may be compromises required. We'll have to get the Chinese to withdraw. Next, please. And there are conditions that the Chinese will almost certainly argue for. Most importantly, they're not going to withdraw if South Korea can't control the area that the South Koreans initially take control of. Next, please. And here's the gotcha on that. South Korea has got terrible demographics for the age group turning to military service. Several years ago, the South Koreans projected the blue line as their total military manpower, the green line as the size of their army that would occur over time. I've shown in circles there what's actually happened and what is now projected for 2022, and the numbers beyond 2022 are my own estimates. The demographics keep going bad. Next, please. My concern is a rock army of 300,000 does not stop an insurgency in North Korea. It does not convince the Chinese they can withdraw because everything will be taken care of, even if we are supporting. That is questionable. And my good colleagues in Korea, we've talked about this. They know they've got to do more with their reserves, but when your reserves train 3 days a year, that doesn't do it for a counterinsurgency role and mission. Next, please. I've just go past that and past that. I've basically done. Go ahead to next. I'm just showing some possibilities. Next. And I'll turn it back over to Colonel Chung.
Sir, thank you. That definitely highlights the fact that this is a multiplayer game that we face, and the stakes are extremely high. So now we're going to look at another critical variable, which is the socioeconomic landscape. Dr. Olders?
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Jason. A very good morning to everyone here. It's a great pleasure to spend some time talking to you about the socioeconomic challenges. The task that was set to me was to provide a kind of a snapshot of what the socioeconomic landscape looks like across the Asia-Pacific region. I think the theme of complexity recurs time and again about the topics that we're addressing, and this is no less different for the socioeconomic context that we're taking a look at. I would add, however, that there is additional descriptor that we could add to the socioeconomic context in addition to just complexity, and that's the issue, that's the word dangerous. And you might find it surprising that I would use a term dangerous to describe the socioeconomic context. But I'm not alone in doing this, and in this respect I'd like to reference the annual risk report that was just published by the World Economic Forum. And that report painted a somewhat pessimistic picture. And again, this is surprising because after all, we appear to be on an upswing of an economic recovery cycle, and here we have the major business leaders of the world pointing out several risks that they are extremely concerned about. The terms that were thrown around were instability, fragility, high risks, shock events, the possibility of cascading consequences that because of the nature of things, the extreme speed with which contagion works nowadays, has the possibility of dragging not only individual nations, but groups of nations and potentially the world economy into steep descents into a less than optimal economic context, if not an outright implosion and collapse. Now, why this pessimism among business leaders, and why this need for extreme caution when we're surveying the socioeconomic context? There are a broader range of factors that have been drawn attention to, but I just want to kind of focus on 5 major things here that kind of highlight the sort of tensions and frictions that exist that have the possibility of derailing much of the economic progress that the Asia-Pacific region has enjoyed. The first point that's made by many is that if we survey the broad Asia-Pacific region, we are struck by the number of economies that are struggling to make a fundamental transition in their economic model. For many nations, their growth has been predicated on an export-oriented basis or leveraging transitions from agriculture to manufacturing and services, very often with highly repressed financial sectors and strict government regulation over business activity. That model of development has virtually run its course and has largely been compromised by several major technological developments as well as the forces of globalization. Consequently, these countries are trying to find a way to move upwards, to upgrade themselves economically, technologically, and as well too through a renovation of government policy to enable these transitions to take place. Not all, unfortunately, are making it successfully. And we have quite a number of countries that are trapped in what we call a middle income trap. and some lower down the scale that are also trapped in an absolute poverty sort of state that are not going to be able to make much headway in the years ahead. For many of these nations, fundamental and sometimes gut-wrenching changes need to be made. And this is going to cause severe economic disruption and dislocation. And this leads then to the second major factor that has to be borne in mind, the consequences of economic transformation, which very often involves unemployment, unfortunately. And partly as a combination of inheriting a less than optimal economic situation and then having to deal with the consequences of economic disruption, inequality is likely to increase in many of these nations. Inequality needs to be understood in an economic sense, most definitely, but there are also aspects of social inequality and political inequality as well, too. And as these aspects of inequality intensify over time, there is room for greater volatility to develop in social and political situations in many of the countries in the region. This is in a context also where these nations are facing significant demographic challenges. The demographic challenges in the case of the Republic of Korea have been alluded to already, but if we've surveyed the nations across the Asia-Pacific, all are carrying significant baggage when it comes to demographic challenges. This might be in the nature of youth bulges and having large proportions of their population age in an age category that has historically shown itself to be volatile in social and political inclinations. Or it could be the other end of the spectrum where we're dealing with economies with significant proportions of aging people and all the constraints that that imposes on fiscal and government policy. By any measure, when we take a look at the nations, these demographic challenges are going to pose severe constraints on growth and severe restrictions as well, too, on the policy latitude available to nations to address the challenges they face. The fourth area that is causing a degree of concern among the nations is the increasing inclination of populations that are suffering inequality and demographically challenged. The increasing proclivity of these populations to resort to protests and challenges to authority. A part of this, of course, may have some legitimate basis in the sense of governance challenges that are faced in various countries, and therefore the willingness of people to voice dissent and disaffection with that. But part of this is also driven by a newfound aggressiveness in many of the disaffected population, enabled by advances in technology such as the internet and so forth, that has allowed for speedier and more effective organization of protest activity, sometimes destabilizing governments significantly. And this then gives rise to possibly the fifth and last sort of area of concern that many observers have for the region. In the face of these internal and external challenges that governments face across the region, many governments have started to harness nationalism as a very potent device to unify nations, and have in turn as well used the nationalist emblem in economic and social policy to try to unify their nations. Now, this, of course, has got domestic consequences that reverberate through social and political life and so forth. But on a more international plane, this resort to nationalism has given rise to sharper elbows being exchanged in the international arena when it comes to discussions of economic and foreign policy. We think, for example, of the wars that are going on in terms of trade wars, investment wars, currency wars. We think in terms of attempts by governments to sew up economic relationships through grandiose programs around the world that link up economies to their own economies. We think about international trade pacts. We think about initiatives such as One Belt, One Road. We think about the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank and initiatives of those kinds that have a very strong competitive edge to them and which may provoke, in turn, the possibility of military retaliation when it comes to sharper exchanges between these nations. So in a nutshell, ladies and gentlemen, what we're kind of looking at is a constellation of factors currently that kind of spell for a much tougher socio and economic context going forward, both within countries, but played out as well regionally and internationally. And these 5 factors that I've sort of drawn attention to are by no means exhaustive. If we add to these compounding complications such as environmental change and the consequences and complications they pose for government policy and for cooperation across the world, we can see that we're looking at quite a difficult picture going forward. I'm often reminded of an old Chinese curse that says, "May you live in interesting times." And it's somewhat unfortunate that when we take a look at the socioeconomic context, many of my fellow colleagues in the economics profession, which by the way is called the dismal science to begin with, so we're kind of behind the ball already. But most of my colleagues do agree that, yes, we may be in for pretty interesting times as we go forward. I'll stop there. Thank you very much.
Sir, thank you for those comments. So now we'd like to go to our last panel member who is going to talk about even another critical facet as we look in the region, commerce and trade. Mr. Ngoko.
Thank you, Colonel Cheung. Good morning, everybody. So I'm going to chat or talk to you a little bit about the shipping lanes, commerce, and I know we've all heard in the past through dollar values of how much commerce moves through the Strait of Malacca, through South China Sea, East China Sea, and through the Sea of Japan. I'm going to kind of break it down into my own easy terminology, which is measured in terms of container volumes and how much volume moves from Asia to different parts of the world. I'll start with our Asia volumes, which go to the United States. And in 2017, and the one acronym that the only acronym I have in my talk today is a TEU, which is 20-foot equivalent units, which is a 20-foot container, which is our common terminology of how we measure volume. But Asia to the U.S. mainland, U.S. was 15.7 million TEUs in 2017 from Asia. There was another 7.2 million TEUs from other parts of the world into the U.S., but 15.7 million of that came from Asia. When you talk about from Asia to Northern Europe, you're talking about another 15 to 16 million TEUs. And this is all finished product coming out of Asia into the 2 locations. And this is the primary head haul for many of the major carriers. And all your major carriers come through the Strait of Malacca and operate in the South China Sea up through East Asia. The biggest trade lane, though, is within Asia. And that's 30 million TEUs approximately in 2016 numbers that move within Asia, intra-Asia. And that's also significant. Not only are you moving some finished product, finished goods between Asian points, Asian countries, we're also moving a lot of raw materials as well as sub-assemblies that move into other parts of Asia to make the finished product, which then moves to the final locations of in different parts of the world. And that's the largest trade lane within in the world. So very, very critical that the trade lanes, the sea lanes, are open, and that commerce can flow freely through Southeast Asia, through the East China Sea, South China Sea, and Sea of Japan, because that's where commerce really flows through all parts of the world. Those are the major countries, but within the Pacific region itself as well, the islands, the island countries, island nations in the Pacific, even for the U.S. territories and islands in the North Pacific. There's a lot of finished product that also starts to move, that also moves from the Asian countries into the different islands and different island nations throughout the Pacific region, and then into South America. But those are smaller in terms of volume, but still key and critical to the economies of the world. So the challenge for a carrier, if all of a sudden there's a disruption in the sea lanes, is pretty dramatic. It's dramatic not only for the carrier, but it's dramatic actually for the world, as it's part of an intricate system on how things work and how things come together in order to make finished products that move throughout the world. I bring it home to Hawaii. Although majority of the goods that come into this state of Hawaii come from the United States, outside of food, majority of that originates in Asia and is then sent to the U.S. and then redistributed into Hawaii. So even for us, even for all the island economies that depend on cargo coming out of the U.S., in some way, shape, or form, the product that we all have, everything that we have in touch right now, has probably come out of Asia. And we must continue to focus on keeping these sea lanes open and keep it free. Otherwise, I think it'll be a very difficult world to operate in as far as commerce is concerned and ocean shipping. So those are my prepared comments. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I think those comments really drove home the importance of the global commerce and trade when you look at 9 out of 10 largest shipping companies in the world reside within that region alone. Now we'll go directly into the question and answer period. So the first question, there's actually quite a few questions here directed at General Chunenbum. I'm going to capture about 3 of the questions kind of in this one question and start with you, sir, and then branch it out to the other panel members. It talks about the challenges of a post-reunification on the Korean Peninsula. And then subsequent to that, are there any lessons learned that we can look from Germany's history that would apply? And then finally, what is the future for U.S. forces on the Korean Peninsula?
Wow. Okay. I think the German model is quite different from Korea because we had a war in Korea. 3 years, and it was 1950, a totally different era where in today's terms, it was a savage war. And, savage things happened. People were ignorant. I don't think even the word human rights existed in those days. So horrible things happened. And those memories are still in the minds of both North and South Koreans. There are still a strong urge for unification. But what I think I see now on the Korean Peninsula is more of a peaceful coexistence by the South Koreans. On the other hand, it seems there's a strong inclination by the North Koreans to have unification. Heaven forbid it is under their terms. For USFK, the United States Forces Korea has provided the Korean people with prosperity, stability, peace, human rights, happiness, first time in our 5,000-year history. I cannot stress how grateful the Korean people are. Now, like I said, we are a vibrant democracy, many opinions. Some are correct, in my view, some are absurd, in my view. So a recent survey of those in their 20s and 30s showed about 20% of the young people in Korea think that USFK should leave. But 80% believe that USFK is important. The real question is what the Americans think. I find myself in a position where I have to try to convince the United States the importance of Korea. One logical explanation is that if Japan is important to you, I would say just the fact that in order to defend Japan, USFK is important. But furthermore, just turn it around. If there were 30,000 troops in Cuba, would that be same as having 25,000 Chinese troops in Florida? I mean, there's a difference. So it's in the best interest of the United States to be there. And I really believe that even China and even North Korea realizes the fact that having USFK in that region is a stabilizer. So we need to think of all of these things. Like I said, small sound bites by some vocal people in South Korea does not make the majority. So the stationing of U.S. forces in Korea is a must for the South Koreans as well as the United States and stability of the region. For the East German lessons, I think, I'm not an expert on that, but generally we've learned some good lessons, but then again, a lot of them is different. Germans, Koreans, 90% same, but still 5 to 10% difference. I talked about the war, but there will be a long way. Hopefully it will not be under unification will not be under war conditions. Thank you.
Any other panel member?
I'll just kind of say a few words about the unification effort and the lessons from Germany and their unification, primarily from an economic perspective. When East and West Germany unified, it essentially went through a shock therapy, bringing together two economies that are fundamentally different, and West Germany inheriting an East that was severely in need of major investment and assistance, and that spanned across a whole range of financial, economic, as well as social programs as well too. So a huge burden was placed upon West Germany in that transformation. And speaking to some of the economists right now that are looking at major transformations of this thought, with reference to the Korean Peninsula, the advice, the preference is to have a much more carefully managed and prolonged process of unification of the economies. Now, whether this is going to be a factor that comes into play in the political discussions and so forth is something that remains to be seen. But certainly from an economic point of view, given the size of the South Korean economy and the estimates of need on the part of North Korea, possibly as well too, constraints on the international community in terms of the generosity that's going to be extended for any transformation effort. The inclination is to advise a slower process, a carefully managed process over time, rather than a kind of shock therapy sort of approach, which was experienced in the case of East and West Germany.
Thank you, sir. So we have time for one more question. So this question is directed to Mr. Ngoko, and then I'm going to ask General Clark to share his perspective as well. This deals with China's growing influence and expansion within the South China Sea. So how does that impact commerce, sir?
Well, commerce is really any interruption in that South China Sea lane, or that sea lane, and I don't even really look at it as just South China Sea. It's really the sea lane from the Strait of Malacca up through the Sea of Japan. That is a major. It's just a major sea lane for commerce going in all directions in all different parts of the world, because of the amount of goods that are produced in the East Asia region and Southeast Asia. So if there's any disruption in having ships move freely through these sea lanes, it would create a significant impact to how commerce moves. And I'm not just talking about just the final product, but it's getting product, raw materials, it's getting pieces to different parts of the Asian countries, which assemble final products to then distribute to the rest of the world. So it can't be stressed enough that how important it is to keep these sea lanes open, that all carriers can operate freely, so as to satisfy the economic requirements of the entire world.
And to look at it from a perspective that we can all understand and apply our skill sets to, goes back to the instruments of national power and how important it is to create teams of teams, and how the importance of interoperability that we gain through exercises and partnerships. That's human interoperability, procedural and technical interoperability, that allows us to really get at the challenge of potentially having an adversary or a competitor threaten our nation, or teams of teams, our nations, plural, economically. So again, it gets at the importance of this forum, having 26 nations present. It gets at some of the activities that we undertake pretty routinely now with Pacific Pathways, where we're operating routinely during exercises that are paired and connected with multilateral partners to really get at a multinational and joint approach with regard to how we interact with one another and demonstrate the use of those instruments of power.
Great, thank you, sir. So, sir, I'd like to turn it over to you now for closing comments.
Thanks, Jason. First, please join me in a round of applause for this fantastic panel. While the panel you see before you is really just the scene setter for the future land force integration and a multinational approach to some of the challenges we face, it's really, again, just the start, and we've only scratched the surface of the goodness that is LandPac. So I'd like to highlight a couple of the other panels that will go in more depth with regard to some of the topics that we've scratched the surface on here today. Panel 5 is going to take a hard look at megacities. Panel 6 on contested environments. Panel 8 on humanitarian assistance and disaster relief. And then panels 3 and 7 will take a look at training and education of regionally engaged leaders, both officers and NCOs, and some of our civilian teammates. So again, thank you for your participation, to the panel members and for the audience for your awesome questions.
Great job, General Clark, and for the panelists, thank you very, very much for getting us off to a great start. We're going to take a break now. We invite you to the exhibit hall, where you'll find some refreshments generously provided by Lockheed Martin. Please be back at 10:30 and 10:30 promptly, because our next event will be a video teleconference that will begin promptly at 10:30. Thank you.